Thank you. Since we had a very entertaining session from Kyle C's just now, I am the Prozac commercial. And since Kyle exhibited his knowledge of human anatomy, talking about introducing us to his Altoids, I want to ask you a question. How many organs are there in our body right now? What would you guess? Since we use this body every single day without looking up Google, take a guess. 15. I got one answer, 15. Anything else? 50. One more, 70. Well, I asked 3 doctor friends of mine, and they were not sure. And they said, it all depends on how you count your organs. So I asked my most trusted source, Miss Google, and Miss Google told me that there are 78 organs in the human body. The largest of that being the skin. Beautiful. So I'm going to introduce you today to the 79th organ in the human body, not created by God or nature, depending on your belief system, but created entirely by human beings. This device here has become the 79th organ. I know some of you are laughing nervously when I make this analogy, but let me introduce you to the 79th organ and why in so many ways it does behave like a human organ. It has a skin, you touch it, it responds. It has ears, you speak to it, it understands you. It's got eyes, it recognizes faces, objects around you. It's got a voice, it can talk to you. And it seems to have this amazing brain capacity because through the internet it connects to all recorded, publicly available human knowledge. So I can talk to it and say, okay, Google, what is the capital of Burkina Faso? And right here tells me Ouagadougou. So my brain capacity is expanded. And it must have a mind, spirit, a consciousness of some sort. Otherwise, why else would we spend so much time keeping this close to our heart? Sleeping with it next to our bedside. How many of you do that? Okay, more than half of the audience. And most importantly, wherever I go in the world, I find human beings with their 79th organ lost deeply in prayer. But all jokes apart, speaking of transformative moments, we reached a unique transformative moment in human history last February. There are an estimated 7.1 billion human beings on the planet, and last February we reached an estimated 7.2 billion mobile devices. For the first time in human history, we now have a piece of technology that exceeds the number of human beings. This has become the most pervasive technology in human history, which means more people have access to one of these devices than have access to clean drinking water or electricity, which is a unique accomplishment in scientific and technology progress, no doubt about that. But it also puts us at a unique inflection point in our evolution where we are now forced to ask ourselves, what is our relationship to these technologies in how we go about our daily lives, in how we relate to each other, how we are present and aware to the everyday sensations, even as our life accelerates forward thanks to all these amazing technologies. But even in the midst, as we get enamored by these technologies, as our lives become so much more empowered and powerful, no question at all that we would not be where we are as a society but for all of these technologies. There is another piece of technology that I want to bring your attention to that is even more pervasive, that everyone has access to, that everyone has always had access to. Because even though these technologies are great, something like the internet is still not available to most of humanity. I know it's hard for us to believe since we've got used to pervasive internet all around us. But in the midst of all of this, there is another piece of technology that is indeed available to every single human being. And not only that, it is the most complex, sophisticated piece of technology known to humankind. And it's equally available whether you are a CEO of a movie studio in Hollywood or if you're a tribesman in the Masai Mara. And what am I talking about? The brain, exactly. The brain, our body, our breath, our consciousness. This set of inner technologies continues to be the most sophisticated piece of technology. And if you want a little bit more deeper understanding of what I'm trying to say, just watch a 2 or a 3-year-old in your family or a friend's family and see how they learn. See how they learn languages. And you can take a 2 or a 3-year-old from here and move them to, say, Beijing, and within 6 months, they effortlessly seem to be speaking Mandarin and putting together sentence constructs and have picked up rules of grammar. Our capacity of our body, breath, brain to cope with what's happening around us is pretty extraordinary. And even at a place like Google, a few months ago, we announced that we had finally developed a piece of software that had taught itself to play the game of Go, and it had beaten the Go champion of the world, Lee Sedol. This is a game with just 3 rules. And finally, that the fact that we taught a piece of software to learn the game was considered an extraordinary progress. And it is from artificial intelligence perspective. Yet, as 6-year-olds around the world, human beings have just sat at their grandparents' laps and learned the game of Go and have become extraordinarily grandmasters of this game. That's why don't underestimate what's going on here inside. Not only that, our entire life experience will be filtered, is being filtered by these inner technologies. Let me break that down for you in a minute. You had a piece of lunch today, and right now that piece of that lunch that you had is being converted somewhere in your body by the inner technology into energy, into pieces of your heart, brain, etc. If you're trying to make sense of what I'm trying to tell you here, it is because the sound, my gestures, my voice, my words are all being processed by your inner technology, and you're piecing it together, and it's leaving some sort of an imprint. If I play a piece of music here, it could move you to tears, it could move you to joy, and that's because your inner technology is processing the sensations coming from that music. Our entire life experience goes through this filter of our inner net. And not only that, as we go through life, we are practicing various kinds of self-expression. And no matter what our self-expression is, our individual self-expression are products of these inner technologies. So whether it's a book you write, a piece of music you compose, a dish you make, a conversation you have, a problem you solve, a piece of software you write, it is all as a result of how this technology functions and operates. And therefore, the quality of our life, the quality of how we show up in our life, is the quality of how we maintain this inner technology. If this is in a state of peak performance, we express ourselves, we show up in life so much more better. And if this technology is not functioning well, then our self-expression, our output falls apart. It's a simple construct there. And just to kind of drive it home, think of 2 different situations. Think of the last time when you had a good night's sleep, woke up early, exercised, had a good breakfast, and were ready to go to meet the day, versus another time when you had something like an allergy or a common cold, nothing very serious. And yet, when you have something like a common cold, this technology is not in a state of peak performance, and the quality of your life shifts dramatically. The same piece of food that you would otherwise enjoy, you don't want to touch. The same friends who are beloved to you, you don't want to see anybody. You just want to put a blanket over your head. The music that you enjoy all of a sudden irritates you. So our primary responsibility as human, one of our most important responsibility, is to keep this technology in a state of peak performance. And that has dramatic, profound impact on the quality of our life. And that puts us at this very paradoxical situation in our modern life. Why? Because on the one hand, these technologies are constantly calling for our attention, and the attention gets fragmented. They need to be fed. They want us to respond to the rings and the pings and the tweets, and we get endlessly distracted, and our inboxes are full, our attention is all over the place. And these inner technologies, for them to go into a state of peak performance, seem to need their moments of quiet. Those heartful moments when we are resting, pausing, and bringing our attention inwards. So they pull us in completely different directions. And the only way to reconcile that seemed to be occasionally pause, and metaphorically speaking, unplug from the internet and plug into our heart, plug into our inner net. And I had a very personal experience just this morning. Life teaches us the exact lessons that we need to learn. So I had gotten to the airport at San Francisco early before the flight, and I checked. I was at the right gate. Everything was fine, but for some reason the flight was a few minutes late. And of course, my internet, these technologies were telling me all the things I need to know with which gate I was going to be checking out, and the flight's a few minutes late, all of those constantly coming to me. And meanwhile, somebody called me on my 79th organ, and I took the call, still sort of keeping an eye, making sure. And something happened in the midst of it. I must have lost a little bit of attention around it, because I finished the call, went up to see what was going on with my flight, and they said it had left. The flight had left, and I couldn't believe what happened in the few minutes of inattention, and I thought I was fully present to everything that was going on. It was a classic modern-day airport scene with multiple gates and announcements going on that you're trying to decipher. And they tell me that they were using all of the modern technologies to call me by name across the paging systems, but somehow I did not hear. And what happened in that moment? My flight's left. I got to be here on the stage speaking. This technology suddenly went into overdrive. I felt frustration, anger. I wanted to blame somebody. It's like your fault, and I felt, stupid. All sorts of emotions came through, and that was a perfect moment that how I was showing up in life, despite all of these technologies that I had that was trying to keep my life under control and balance. In that moment, what mattered was, how was I going to respond to that situation using this technology first and foremost? So I sat, took a deep breath, calmed myself down, meditated, and said, if this is the worst thing in my life, it is still okay, and let's figure this out. I had to kind of calm down and then solve the problem about finding the next flight, etc., and calling the organizers here. So those kind of life situations are going to show up all the time. And how do we reconcile our life when it's getting pulled in these two different directions by these external amazing technologies, while the needs of our inner technologies are different? So I was struggling with this whole concept and situation because of the nature of my own work and life path I've chosen. I live in the lion's den, right? I walked into the lion's den when I chose a career in Silicon Valley, despite being a yoga meditation practitioner. So I've struggled to reconcile these two things. And what I found works for me is to build in tiny daily or weekly habits and ritualize them, much like brushing our teeth. If it's a ritual, I seem to be able to get to do them on a regular basis, and those ground me, those rituals ground me, and I've had the best success in incorporating it into my life, and which is what I write about in the book. And I want to leave you today with 5 of my own rituals so that you can think about adopting the same rituals or finding other ones that may work for you. So the way I try to keep my inner technologies in a state of peak performance so that I can show up in the world and use the external technologies well. The first ritual is a simple concept called focus on the essential. Focus on the essential. And this comes from a piece of wisdom that I got from German philosopher Wolfgang Goethe, where he says, things that are more important should not be at the mercy of things that are less important. Things that are more important should not be at the mercy of things that are less important. So how many essentials do you need? I would say start with 1. Ask yourself, what is the most important thing in my life? Or maybe have 3, or at most about 5. Because once you know what your essentials are on a daily basis, you can say yes to certain things that feed those essentials and say no to most of the things that are probably distractions. Like as Kyle was referring to how our mind wanders when we look at social media, we're looking at everybody else's fabulous life, meanwhile ignoring what might be your core essentials. So in my own case, I came up with my essentials about 14 years ago when I was running a startup company in Silicon Valley. It was a very stressful period trying to raise money and hire people and build a company, write a business plan, etc. So to get some respite from that stress, I took a weekend off to go stay in a Benedictine monastery on the Big Sur coast in a town called Lucia. It's called the New Camaldoli Hermitage. It's a group of 11 reclusive Camaldolese monks who live there, go about their practice, and one way by which they run their operations is providing cottages to visitors who can come and find a space for silence contemplation. Beautiful place on a cottage overlooking the Pacific Ocean. So I was sitting in my cottage in my own personal retreat space in silence when it struck me that my company has a business plan, but I have no business plan for my life. Much like Kyle was saying, we sit in a restaurant and say, I don't know what to eat. It wasn't simply as I don't know what to eat. I wasn't even sure what I'm doing with my life or if I had a plan. I had no business plan for my life. So I spent the entire weekend writing what I called the business plan for my life. I called it the organizing principles of my life. And I didn't want it to be a 200-page document like a traditional business plan. I wanted it to be on one sheet of paper. Because I said, our life need not be all that complicated. It should fit one sheet of paper. And I wasn't even satisfied with that. I said, it should be simple enough I can reduce it to 5 words. So I spent the entire weekend reducing my organizing principles of my life into 5 words. And for these many years since then, I've carried them on my fingertips so that on a daily basis, I can decide how I spend my time, my attention, my energy on those 5 things and say no to most other things. So one of the things I'm going to ask you through the course of this day, when you meditate today or as you leave the session, what are your essentials? And if ever you want to go live in that monastery or stay in that monastery for a few days, the URL is www.contemplation.com. And how a group of 11 reclusive monks snagged one of the best URLs and desirable ones is, of course, one of life's great mysteries. The second ritual I want to talk about is a simple concept of do one thing at a time. And I know what you're thinking. This is the most profound wisdom this guy has got to share. We all know it, do one thing at a time. But the reason I want to repeat this very simple concept, which is the equivalent of saying eat your broccolis and exercise well, is that despite knowing it intuitively, we seem to be determined to prove that we will be the first generation in history to do 6 things at the same time, to multitask and get away with it. I sometimes get into arguments with people who say that, the next generation is really getting good at doing their homework while they watch a YouTube video and are in 3 chat conversations. But after several years of trial and error, the conclusion I've come to is this technology is extremely good if you ask it to do one thing, and it falls apart when you ask it to do 6 different things. And one way by which you ground yourself, come into a state of meditative calm, even when you're doing an activity, is to bring your singular attention on just one thing. This is why you will never see a virtuoso musician, say, practicing the violin or the cello and simultaneously watching TV. They bring the singular attention. Sportsmen do this. And for all of the people who might be still sitting there debating with me about this point, I will ask you this question. Imagine that you had to have open heart surgery and your surgeon said, I'm extremely good at multitasking. I also like baseball and the stock market. So while I'm working on you, I'll have a couple of channels going on so that I can keep an eye on it. Would you agree to get on the operation table? No. So you want his undivided attention. In the same way, how we show up in our life with our undivided attention on one task is extremely important. But when you step back and look at how we lead our daily lives, blogger Linda Stone calls it, we go through our day in the state of continuous, partial attention. And I'll tell you about a great example. A few weeks ago, I was walking through Chicago airport, and I saw this young lady in front of me in the security line, and she was on a call on the phone while she was still having a lunch. And therefore, since her hands were not free, she was pushing her bags with her leg, inching her way to the security line. And while this was happening, the caller needed a piece of information. She said, hold on, I'll look it up. So she now cradled the phone, pulled her tablet, started using one thumb to look it up while eating a sandwich. And she got to the TSA agent who said, I need your boarding pass and driver's license. She said, hold on a second, put down the sandwich, retrieved the boarding pass, gave it to him, and went back to eating the sandwich and the call and looking at the information. At this time, she was doing 5 things at the same time. I looked at it and said, how did we get here as a human race? how have we even survived as a species? And we seem to insist on living this particular way. So next time you catch yourself, the one thing I'm going to ask you around this is, in the next few days, when you notice yourself doing 3 things at the same time, just notice. I'm not asking you for a habit change. Just notice that I am doing 3 or 4 things, and ask yourself, are those 3 things at the same level of importance that I need to simultaneously do it? Or can I put 1 or 2 of them on hold and bring my attention just to one of the tasks, get it done before I move on to the next, and see if that makes a difference in the quality of how this technology works. The third ritual I want to talk to you about is to commit yourself to at least 1 minute of connecting to your internet. Whatever that may be, 1 minute of heartfulness. So for me, my personal practices of taking that step back and connecting to my internet on a regular basis to nurture these inner technologies, my pathways are yoga and meditation. So I have a commitment to practice 1 minute of yoga, 1 minute of meditation every single day. Now, this should strike you as the most ridiculous suggestion you heard at this conference today. 1 minute of yoga? What's the point? But I'll tell you how I arrived at this particular rituals and why it had a profound and significant impact on my life. Years ago, when I was a teenager growing up in India, I ran away to an ashram to become a yoga teacher and learn yoga and meditation. And at the ashram, they have a set ritual where you get up at 5:30 in the morning, sit for meditation at 6, and 6:30 you chant, and 8 o'clock you do 2 hours of asana practice. And when you do the exact same ritual every single day, 7 days a week, for weeks at a time, it puts your mind, body, spirit in a state of alignment that is astonishing, that is incredible. And I felt so grounded, so present, so alive, so in the moment that, and it was the first time in my life that I had experienced something like that. I was determined to hold on to that feeling. And so I made a resolve as I was leaving the ashram and going back to my college dorm that for the rest of my life, I'm going to practice yoga for 1 hour every single day and meditation for 30 minutes every single day. That commitment I made to myself lasted all of 3 days. Once I was back in my college dorm, I was not getting up at 5:30 in the morning. Instead, I was staying awake till 3 in the morning, listening to Pink Floyd and Jimi Hendrix and just having a great time. And all of this discipline fell apart very quickly. So I went through my life with this lack of integrity towards my personal commitment. And I struggled with it. And as an adult, I arrived at Google, still struggling with the fact that I couldn't do this on most days. I was lucky on an occasional weekend if I had actually stuck to my commitment. So this is when I asked a colleague of mine at Google, his name is Meng. He's known as the jolly good fellow of Google. He founded the Search Inside Yourself program at Google and also wrote a book by that name. And I said, Meng, I'm struggling with this, trying to have a daily practice. How do you do it? What do you suggest? And Meng was a lot more wisdom than I have, said, Gopi, why don't you start with 1 breath? Because even if you're trying to meditate for a full hour, it's really 600 breaths strung together. Start with the first breath before you go on to the second one. And since I'm a compulsory neurotic overachiever, I said, I can do better than that. I'm going to do a whole minute. So that's how I made the 1 minute commitment. Now here's what happened after I made that commitment. A week went by, 2 weeks went by, and when I look back for the first time in my life, I could look back and say with integrity that I had done yoga and meditation every single day. Of course, it was just for a minute, but I had still done it. But there is another portal, another doorway open that I was not prepared for. On many of those days, I would finish my 1 minute of sitting quietly on my cushion and just kind of grounding myself. And after that, my mind would say, this is so sweet, this is so beautiful. What else is out there that you're rushing off to more important than this? So I'd easily go into the 2nd minute and 3rd minute, and I was able to hit the 10, 15, 20-minute mark. So the ask here is find whatever it is, and if it's your heartfulness practice or anything else that allows you to take a step back and nurture your internet, find the lowest possible threshold for you that you can say no to on a daily basis and make it a habit and ritualize it. And if it's 1 minute, start with 1 minute. And as Kamalesh ji was saying, it doesn't have to be a formal sitting practice. You can do it anywhere. You could be, waiting for the traffic light to change, and instead of getting annoyed and irritated, that might be a minute to, just take a deep breath and notice what's going on in your body and do the relaxation exercise. So find the lowest possible threshold. The third ritual I want to talk about is the fourth ritual. Thank you. The fourth ritual I want to talk about. I was going to repeat the third one, so clearly you got that, right? So the fourth ritual I want to talk about is to make at least one appointment in a week for a formal process of connecting with your internet. And how I arrived at this ritual was I noticed that in the way I was living, and this is true for anyone who's in a professional setting working with multiple people, our lives are driven by our calendars. There are appointments and schedules and meetings that show up, and if it is there, we tend to show up for those meetings because somebody put in our calendar. Not only that, because the calendars are now a publicly visible property, if you are in a large company, your calendar is wide open, anybody can grab time on it. Your calendar gets hijacked, your time gets hijacked by somebody. But when it shows up as an appointment on the calendar, I found that I was tending to stick to it and show up for those meetings. So I said, why not make appointments with myself, since I am the most important person when it comes to taking care of my internet? So the habit here I'm asking you to do is to think of at least one appointment a week. So there are 168 hours in a week. Most of it seems to be out of your control as your life gets hijacked, your calendars get hijacked by someone else or the demands of your professional life. But at least 1 hour of the week, commit to a regular practice to begin with. And when I say commit to 1 hour a week, it's not a floating hour somewhere in the week. It has to be the same hour, fixed hour, and the same day of the week. So it could be something like Saturday, 8 o'clock, I'm going to go for a walk in the nature by the lake near my house, and stick to that commitment. It has to be non-negotiable. The rest of your week can go crazy, but there's something that you want to hold on to once a week, fixed slot, fixed day of the week. So for me, there are about 2 or 3 that I've come up with at this point that are completely non-negotiable. One of them is that every Monday at 5:30, I lead a yoga practice on the Google campus. And this is the program I founded that Emma was talking about. It's a yoga program for the Googlers, and I call it Yoglers. So I founded this 10 years ago when I joined Google, and for 10 years, Monday 5:30, I've never missed a single class. That is my one. Thank you. That is my one non-negotiable commitment, and I've said no to important meetings and client meetings, saying I have to do this. I'm come back and I'm willing to continue the conversation. Unless I'm physically traveling, if I'm not there, I make sure somebody else will lead the practice, and I teach where I go. So I've taught in the Buenos Aires office, or I've taught in the Tokyo office, because there's a tremendous sense of integrity you feel. There's something grounding when you can hold on to at least one thing every single week. So this is one of the rituals I'm going to ask you to think about. And as soon as you get to your personal calendar, figure out one activity that helps you nurture your internet that you're going to put on the calendar and stick to it for the next several weeks. Same day of the week, same hour. Tell your coworkers, tell your friends and family. And which is why, and the way I was walking in, one of the groups from Stockton said every Wednesday they meet for a meditation practice. And that sort of regularity with the Sangha allows you to anchor something in your life that cannot be taken away from you. The fifth ritual, and I want to close up with that, is a concept of friend yourself. So I know Kyle made a lot of funny references to what social media is doing in our lives, and it's amazing that all of these technologies now allow us to connect with hundreds, if not thousands of friends, some weak connections, some strong connections, and read about what's happening in their social life, and also talk about how amazing our lives are across Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn. All of that is amazing. But in the midst of all of this, the one fact we have to constantly remember is that the most important friendship, the most important relationship we'll ever have is the one with ourself. The most important relationship you will ever have is the one with yourself. And therefore, on a regular basis, as part of this practice, part of nurturing your internet, take time to listen to the tweet from your heartbeat. Not done yet. Listen to that status update from your body. Listen to the chat request from your brain. Because there is something important it is trying to tell you, and if you don't pay attention to it and respond to it, at some point the inner technologies are going to malfunction. So here this habit is to take time on a regular basis to connect with this most important friend you'll ever have. And even as part of the heartfulness practice, what you learn is to love this particular friend inside as opposed to loathing it, because this is the most important relationship you will cultivate. So let me wrap this up. The core message that I'm trying to deliver is this very simple concept that the most important technology that we all need to take care of and put in a state of peak performance is this inner technology. Because if this inner technology is functioning and functioning well and the state of peak performance, then we will go on to do amazing things with the outer technologies that are out there, including make sure we get on the right flight at the right time. And the best way to, thankfully, the methods for putting this technology in a state of peak performance has been figured out by someone else. These masters who've come before us experimented with the mind, body, nutrition, etc., and have left behind for us a user manual for this inner technology. So all we need to do is to figure out among those practices what are the ones that work for us and ritualize them and make it a habit in our life. So I'm not going to stand here and say these are the 5 things that you need to adopt. And it's up to you what you decide. But as long as you recognize the fact that this is the most important technology and you have a commitment to move this technology into a state of peak performance, and you'll do it by taking several of these wisdom traditions like the heartfulness method that's available to us and build daily and weekly rituals, you will have an amazing, heartful, beautiful, joyous life of peak productivity and performance. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.